everyone. Welcome to Park Street University. I'm Emily Pennington, Content Manager for Park Street, and I head up the educational programming. Today's seminar is on the future of retail. We've asked two esteemed experts to join me today. Each have prepared a presentation. Mike Provence from 3x3 will focus on the off-premise, and Matt Crompton from Nielsen CGA will focus on the on-premise. They'll walk you through the changes those channels have seen in 2020, the resulting trends, and then we're going to make some predictions on what the rest of the year might look like. If you're wondering a little bit more about who they are, Mike is the CEO of 3x3, a marketing technology company focused on modernizing the ways brands and retailers engage and sell to the independent retail consumers. He's a longtime tech strategy expert and has built many groundbreaking technology businesses. Matt is the Client Solutions Director for Nielsen's on-premise division, Nielsen CGA. He has consulted for some of the leading alcohol suppliers across Europe and the US, and he's been putting out a weekly report on the state of the on-premise for the last several months. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mike.
Thank you, Emily. I'm looking forward to talking with you today about what we've seen on the off-premise side of the industry during the last several months and how things look as we head toward the end of the year. As Emily said, we're a digital customer engagement company, and what we do is focus with retailers not so much on the transaction, but on helping retailers and brands find the right customers for their products and get them into the store, whether that's walking in the store or, as we're going to talk about here, a lot of the changes that have driven more people to shop online. But we are a marketing technology company that focuses on what we refer to as top and middle of the funnel, and helping find the new customers and the right customers for the brands and products that you're selling. Even before the COVID outbreak took control of the economy, we were already seeing big moves toward digital in CPG and in off-premise alcohol sales. And in fact, when you look more broadly at some of the data about consumer behavior online, the consumers are really the ones pulling the brands and the retailers into the digital world. About 70% of US consumers today shop online for one sort of product or another. And at the same time, when you look at manufacturers, about $2.6 billion of sales have been done online. That's only 1% of the entire off-premise industry. And retailers are probably the ones that are struggling the most to figure out what digital means to them and how they can reach consumers online. And that has largely been something that in the last 6 months has accelerated because of COVID, because of the economic changes, to the point where now you're seeing roughly $1 billion in online sales, but 90% of that is through wine. And roughly of 50,000 liquor stores that are out there, only probably 10 to 15%, even through all of COVID, have been able to very quickly and effectively adopt the tools they need to be able to do transactions online or to do curbside pickup. So this is an area that is still going to be a big draw for consumers, and it's going to be important for retailers to figure out. Interestingly, when you actually look at how consumer demand for Bev Alc product has behaved during this period from, say, March through now, we all know that there was a big spike toward the beginning. The panic buying of people trying to figure out how much alcohol they needed to have on hand at home to make it through this epidemic. But as people got comfortable and as people settled into new routines, the behaviors started to drop back into normalish behaviors. In fact, this chart here, the orange line, shows you from a Google search perspective, the level of people's interest in searching for COVID and information on COVID, and it tracks very neatly with both the peak in panic buying sales that occurred in the March-April timeframe, but also it drops off dramatically through the summertime, where you start to see overall sales begin to drop back to essentially normal levels post July 4th. On a week-to-week basis, there was variation, but you can see as we get into September, with the offset of Labor Day there, that basically sales have returned more or less to normal for local retail off-premise. One thing that has changed and has been the impact of this period of time on and this crisis on the way people shop online. When you looked at local liquor stores prior to COVID, or even forget online, just the local liquor stores themselves, about less than half or less than 5% of all sales in those stores happen through online shopping. And the typical basket ranged from $25 to $35 in those stores. During the crisis, during those first few months of the crisis, the baskets jumped to about $125 to $150. And at the same time, we saw a surge in online shopping that it was anywhere from 25 to 45% of store sales occurring in the stores that were able to deliver that. But post-crisis, or I should say kind of in the late summer period, as things began to fall back into new normal behaviors, those basket sizes started to slip back, still larger than pre-crisis, but definitely half of what they were seeing during panic buying. And the number of transactions that were happening online also began to drop down as people were able to go back and walk in stores and shop the old-fashioned way again. But the underlying element here is that consumers have forever changed the way they think about online shopping for alcohol as they have for any other product. And in fact, when we look at surveys about behavior during this period, 70% of consumers now shop online, and most of them search online before buying. This was an issue that the retailers were grappling with even before COVID and really hadn't taken time to address. I think they were kind of waiting it out to see when they actually had to think about digital as a part of their marketing strategy. But even more telling is that 75% of consumers changed their buying behaviors in the past 6 months. And that doesn't just mean shopping online. That can mean one of the things that we see happen is that more shoppers move to shopping big box and move to shopping in grocery for alcohol because they wanted to limit the number of trips. They wanted to limit the number of stops during the trips, and they wanted more larger stores so they felt safer as they went about their shopping. And this had a very negative impact overall on the local liquor store, particularly when it comes to retaining and capturing new customers. And it's estimated from a study by McKinsey that likely up to 80% will continue all these behaviors even after things begin to settle down next year. So, to kind of summarize the changes we've seen, the magic of the local liquor store has always been its size and its willingness to experiment with new products and to create opportunities for discovery, so that when people came in, they didn't come in with shopping lists. They came in to walk the aisles and find out what's new and pick up what they wanted and maybe add a few things to their basket that they hadn't thought about. And there was a focus on quality, and there was a focus on tastings and hand selling, and everything that we come to love about the local liquor store has all shifted under this kind of current condition to a focus on availability. So now more of the big brands are selling faster because they have better recall in people's minds, and people are trying to get in and out of the store quickly. So they're not trying to find that hidden gem among a shelf of 50 bourbons or 50 tequilas. And they're looking for value. So they're looking for bigger sizes. They're looking for better prices. And they, as I said before, they're more willing to skip on the liquor store and just shop at the grocery store and switch categories because it keeps them, they feel it keeps them safer. They feel it's better for them to be in and out quickly. And that's had a big impact in the way that the liquor stores that have been successful in addressing this time have dealt with it, is by being able to shift very quickly to online, curbside, and delivery. This impact isn't just been felt with the retailers. As I mentioned with availability, one of the fundamental shifts in consumer behavior in the last 6 months has been this unexpectedly large shift of people's buying behaviors to big brands. Some bigger brands that had been very mature and were on the decline had suddenly had resurgences because the brands came with good, easy recall for consumers, or they showed up in highlighted positions on websites so that when people were shopping, it made it very easy for them to fill their basket with the first things they saw that they recognized. And the impact of this for the craft distillers in particular, is one example, was a decline of 41% of sales in that period, and roughly $700 million of sales lost because they either couldn't get the shelf space or they didn't get the recognition by the consumer to be able to be competitive when it came to selling online. Now, I've said all that, but one of the things that we see in our data is a return to normalish kinds of behaviors. I mentioned in the earlier graph, you could see that our buying behavior around alcohol was tracking very well against people's interest in searching for issues about COVID. But even more importantly, some of the actions that have been taken in the various state economies, reopenings of stores and economic recovery starting to happen, has helped to counteract or reclaim some of the position that the liquor stores were looking to gain back from grocery and from others. And in fact, when you look at data post July 4th, one of the things you see in a couple graphs here, one where we look at average sales variation year over year during the period from post July 4th to now, or through August, that with a half of a standard deviation, or basically 15% decline or rate increase in sales, 50% of all the stores in our network stayed flat during that time. And this has been consistent with similar reportings of other CPG environments as well. When you widen that to more of a 30% decline or increase, 72% of all stores stayed flat. And so what we're seeing now is post July 4th, things have really begun to settle down, and a lot of stores in most markets around the country are returning to levels that they were used to before. But there's some, when you start to dig into the data a little bit deeper, it provides some interesting views. In fact, when you look at the graph on the left here, this is a monthly look at year-over-year comparison. So for spirits, wine, and beer from March through August, you can see that spirits and wine held up very well during COVID. Right? It was perhaps easier to buy those online, or people were, again, going for value over and quantity and value over normal behaviors, let's say. Beer didn't do it quite as well across the board, but all of them began to decline in terms of year-over-year growth in August. And a lot of this had to do with simply people were overstocked, right? They bought early and bought often, and they were kind of winding down their supplies. It was also a transitional month as we started to head into fall, and so there were some behaviors there as well. But where it gets a little more interesting, and I think where it's more useful from a retailer perspective, is to look at how the sales jumped back and forth month over month, meaning this graph on the right for spirits, wine, and beer, comparing the change from March to April, April to May, et cetera, et cetera. And what you see is a replenishment behavior, or this kind of boomerang, where people came in March, stocked up heavily, then didn't come back in April, then swung back in May and June, then didn't come back in July, and came back in August. And so retailers have been going through this boomerang of inventory movement, and it's creating very unpredictable replenishment cycles for them, because they've been more used to burning down inventory over a number of months rather than this kind of surge happening every other month or so. So, there were a lot of negative effects, as we all know, from the COVID shutdowns. And one of the things it did do for the local retailers was to emphasize the prominence of other channels, be those other sort of brick and mortar channels, online channels, and in particular, a lot of direct to consumer and marketplaces that did well during this time, because they offered convenience and simplicity to the consumers that were likely to sign on to online shopping. It also impacted events and destination buying, which had historically been a staple of the liquor store. Concerts, events, summertime activities, all those things were fed by the local liquor store. And again, as I mentioned, restocking behaviors changed dramatically how retailers had to manage their store, and that was an unexpected and very quick change. But there have been some pockets of silver lining that leaned toward the benefit of the liquor store. retailers who had already moved online and had established practices tended to grow over the period. They tended to have sustainable growth. They didn't see the boomerangs of activity as much. They continued to see growth that for some of them was exceeding Christmas time levels of sales. Um, Buying behaviors also shifted up market because the people who were shopping the liquor stores came there for products they knew they could only get there, and that they were picking up, and their other products were being picked up in other places, but they knew they had to come to the retailer for higher price, higher margin products, and that had a bottom line benefit for many of the retailers. Spirits, as we'll see in a minute, was solid throughout this time, and also hard seltzer really never slowed down, and it became a anchor for the entire beer category. One of the products that as health concerns became more and more prominent with COVID, and coupled with summertime behavior and more people getting outside, there was this kind of focus on what we call wellness or health products. And it was somewhat relevant, and it tended to be led by low alcohol content seltzers, clean wines, and organic spirits. Right? The trend skews really disproportionately to active and millennial segments. So when you look at the buying behaviors, the younger, more active participants tended to move to these healthier bulk products. But we still saw some resistance. When you look at consumers of beer, wine, and spirits, a little less than half still don't really care what ingredients go into their wine, and 44% don't really care where the grapes were grown. They just want their wine. So it's not a dominant trend, but it's a trend that's become higher and higher as we've moved through this year. So as we look ahead and think about October, November, December, and this important period of time for retailers of alcohol, we think about kind of how things are going to change for consumers in this time. And if you look around major cities now, even ones in colder northern states, they're all planning for restaurants to be open with outdoor seating and to try to get back to some, let's call it mid-pandemic retail levels. The June, July timeframe when people were starting to branch out to restaurants, and customers are going to come back to the mid-pandemic consumer behaviors as maybe new rashes of hot spots emerge and people start seeing winter impact health again. There may be rushes to more, if not panic buying, more stocking up that goes on than normal in the OND timeframe. But by all estimation, when you look at the sales behaviors over the year, we should expect to see pretty much OND back to normal levels, and probably in some certain pockets of the country surges because of response to COVID outbreaks and any sort of impact that come from regulatory changes of the states and the cities on consumer behavior. You can kind of see that as you look at these two graphs, and as I said before, spirits have been very solid. When you look at the graph on the upper right here, you're looking at a graph that begins in January 2019 all the way through September of 2020, October of 2020. And what you see for spirits in the local liquor store is that they stayed solid. And in fact, when you look at the first yellow bar is really the period of the summertime 2019. And when you compare that to the summertime of 2020, you see spirit sales stayed up, and you see that the graph, which is the blue line, and you see the graph of the orange line, which is beer, and the graph of the red line that is wine, look very similar. Beer a little bit reduced over 2019, but wine in particular stayed very solidly the same in behavior in those comparative periods. Where it's interesting is when you look at the kind of October, November, December bar in 2019, and you see the expected increase in spirits, the expected increase in wine, and the expected decrease in beer. Each of those are going to be amplified by the effects of COVID outbreaks and regulatory response to that. But in general, as you look at the graph on the bottom left, in particular the green circle that shows you that post July 4th um, return to normal, if you were going simply off of the behavior of the last few months, everything seems to be trending back toward a normal O&D for us. So I would say the only real outlier here is for people in specific markets to be very aware of what's happening with consumer behavior because of reports of outbreaks or regulatory changes, because otherwise the current buying pattern suggests that we're going to have a normal O&D across the board. But again, it varies state by state, city by city. So you have to be hyper aware as retailers of how your consumers are reacting to the things going on in their environment. So, as I mentioned, spirits, I just wanted to highlight some of the things about spirits that we've seen over the course of the last 6 months. Tequila really led the spirits surge and stability throughout this period. Whiskey is still the biggest, and vodka second to that, but tequila showed the greatest growth, and it was the only one that had kind of a persistent growth across all 6 months in that period, followed by pre-mixed alcohol cocktails, which really suggested people were looking for those feel-good margaritas and those products that were easy to pack in a picnic basket and go outside with. All the other categories in spirits, except for brandy, showed growth during the early phase of COVID, and all of them, as we have talked about, started to drop off toward the end of the summer period. So if I can leave you with a few things here, it's great to look at the data and get all these trends, but what's important is to figure out under the hood, how does it affect your business? And ultimately that means understanding your consumers that are shopping in your store, and particularly the ones you want to bring in. And because you've got to look at where the margins and the opportunities are with the products in your store and figure out how to reach those consumers and get them in the door. Because the one thing you don't control is the decisions they make about where to go shop. But once they get to you, as a retailer, you have a lot more influence on what they're buying and the products you make available to them. So use the data to find the right products and use the data to find the right consumers, ultimately get those regulars back in and bring some new customers in as well. It's going to be important now as retailers, as we get into this period, that we think about marketing our businesses in new ways, meaning you're not just putting products on shelves, you're not just hand selling wines and spirits to the consumers that walk in the door. You've got to engage them before they ever think about shopping in your store by getting events and virtual events and things that involve them in the discovery process in new ways, because the old ways of discovering by walking the aisles aren't going to be back for a long time. And in between now and then, we need to find ways to reach those consumers and give them the experiences and give them the exposure to the products that they're looking for in ways that really set you as the retailer up as experts in this area. And I'll wrap up here with 3 through lines that I want you to take with you from this presentation. I do expect demand to return to normalish levels, but again, there could be variations in that depending on where you are. I think from a retailer point of view, you need to look at that and track that really closely, because you want to avoid the bullwhip effect that you've been experiencing over the course of the summer, with surges in purchasing and then declines and then surges in purchasing that just left you holding lots of inventory much longer than you anticipated. Secondly, you've got to know your customer. At a time where your customers are now engaging you virtually or remotely and they're not coming in the store first, you need to find ways to meet them where their journey is starting and to take them through their journey and get them into the store to shop with you. And finally, I think from a product point of view, given where we stand with socially distancing and what we're expecting to see out of COVID, I think that the growth will continue for portable packaged products, not the big cases and things that are hard to move are not going to do as well until things start to settle down. So focus on products that consumers can, that give them the joy they're looking for and make it easy for them to transport. So that's all I have. Thank you.
And now we'll have Matt come up and give his presentation on the on-premise.
All right, thank you, Emily. And yeah, thanks for having us. What we're going to do today is we're just going to talk you through some of the latest things at the on-premise environment as things stand here in the US. Obviously, 2020, it doesn't need me to tell you, has been one of the most challenging years on record for the channel. So what I'm going to do is try and give you the full 360 view, a bit of measurement, a bit of consumer, a bit of analytics, and a little bit of a look to the future to see what's next for the channel, as hard as that can be with such changing things. But just to really look where there is still some elements of opportunity and pockets of growth, and where we can try and find that in these hard times. So if we just give you a quick little intro first. And yeah, the agenda for this. So yeah, sales, that's what I'm going to go through. Our measurement data, bit of consumer data as well, because obviously the on-premise consumer has changed so much over the last 3-4 months. It's completely different. Any consumer research you've done previously, way earlier in this year, it really is needs to be refreshed now, because people are using the on-premise for such different occasions. What's the experience? Are people enjoying it when they go out? What do they expect in terms of safety, but also in terms of that overall value of experience? Where are people going? And a little bit about takeout and delivery as well, because obviously that's become more and more important for the trade as time has gone on. And then I'll summarize with a few key takeouts. So very quickly, before we get into this, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our business, Nielsen CGA. Most of you will have heard of Nielsen, obviously one of the world's biggest market research company, but it may be one of the first times you've heard of Nielsen CGA. We are a partnership with Nielsen, and all we do is on-premise. Okay, so we very much specialize in the on-premise channel, be that pubs, bars, nightclubs, all over the world. We do this. We started off in the UK. We've been going for about 30 years there, and then we moved here to the US in 2015. We now actually have services in Canada as well, and next year we will be branching out into the full Americas and the Caribbean as well. So exciting times in a difficult time, but hopefully some of the stuff we'll tell you will give you a real feel for what we can get to within the on-premise space. So let's get straight into it. As I said at the start, we're going to look at some sales data. Now, this is for the whole year so far, and what this is showing you is eating and drinking sales, so food and drink, and its velocity, so rate of sales, so the average dollars per the average account in the on-premise. Now, as you can see, this is a week-on-week growth. We were sort of bobbing back and forth around that 0% mark, slightly flat, slightly up, a little bit here and there on the week of Valentine's Day with strong growth. And then obviously COVID-19 hit. So you can see that we went down to about 80% rate of sale fall. So the market basically fell off a cliff in March. And then since then, there's been steady return to almost flat week-on-week performance, which is what we see now, with a few dips here and there when it was 4th of July weekend. Where we are right now is versus pre-COVID, total sales for outlets which are still actually open is down about 20%. In terms of rate of sale, but that is in places which are still operating. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of closures in the on-premise or permanent closures, which we still have to navigate. How does that affect beer, wine, and spirit sales? How does the sales mix sort of differ? And what we're seeing here is it's very different between volume and value. So volume is the actual amount of the liquids sold, okay? So you can see that 86% of all volume comes from beer, but value tells a very different story, where we see that spirits actually has the higher dollar share now out of beer, wine, and spirits. Since COVID and now, that's stayed about the same. There's not been too much of a difference in the sort of the mix. It's important to note, though, that beer is starting to come back on that value thing, largely because we classify hard seltzer in that category. And as we've seen in some of the other presentations from Mike today, hard seltzer is not something which is going away. And it's certainly something which is becoming more and more prominent in the on-premise, having grown in the off-premise originally. So it's really important to understand consumers at the moment. And what we've done ever since COVID-19 hit is that we've ran these every 2 weeks, this consumer pulse survey, to see what's truly going on out there and how people are acting and what they need from their on-premise visits. We survey around 1,500 people. All of them have to have visited the on-premise or ordered from the on-premise within that 2-week period. And we look at 5 states. That's Illinois, Florida, Texas, New York, and California. So we try and cover most of the big ones, and it gives us a real clear idea of what's truly going on. So straight off the bat, what we ask how many people have been out for an eating occasion or a drinking occasion, okay? Now, this isn't to say that on those eating occasions they didn't have beverage alcohol. They may have done. It's just where the main purpose of the visit is for a meal or is for a drink. Now, obviously, state restrictions do come in play here. There's lots of places where bars simply haven't been able to open yet. So those drinking occasions haven't really got going, and that really shows in the numbers. But what you can see from back in June, that's how far back this goes, we are seeing a slow and steady increase in the number of consumers who feel more comfortable re-entering the trade. So we've gone from 36% there for an eating occasion in sort of mid-June, and then to mid-September, that's increased to about 48. So about 1 in 2 people now do feel comfortable going out. And what's really nice and what's important to see is those people who do, they're often going out for multiple visits within that time frame. So people are satisfied when they go. It's just making sure outlets do all they can to really entice those other customers. We can look at this by state, and we can look at this by age group as well. And there's some quite differing things which are at play. So again, that same time frame, early July through till sort of mid-September. And you can see that originally New York was a little bit behind everywhere else. A lot stricter restrictions were in place because obviously that place was hit so badly from COVID at the start. But now you'll see that as things are slowly starting to reopen there, consumers do feel the most comfortable in going out for eating occasions there. California has stayed in that sort of 30% area as the lowest out of our main states that we look at. And I think there's lots going on in that place right now, you know, obviously with forest fires as well, much more than just COVID-19 and a bit more sort of safety first approach there. And then Florida and Texas, it's been sort of bouncing around that 50% watermark for quite some time now. Basically ever since restrictions were lifted in those states, we have seen a lot higher visitation in those areas. Now, it's often perceived, and I thought this at first, that when bars and restaurants would open back up, it would straight be the young people who would rush out first, that 21 to 34-year-old group. But actually what we've seen is very quickly, most age groups have felt comfortable doing this. So in the early days, it was young people who went back first, absolutely. But what we've seen over the last sort of 2 months or so is that 35 to 54-year-olds and 55 plus as well now do feel comfortable going out into the trade. So what do we need to get people doing more? Just to explain this chart, we ask people what they want to see on their on-premise visits, what will encourage more visitation. And it's all the usual PPE things that you'd see, you know, wearing masks and gloves, spacing, additional hygiene programs, QR codes, paper menus, and things like that. What's interesting, though, is within the last 3 months, the one we've seen the biggest increase in is outdoor seating areas. Now, this, of course, is going to become a real challenge for some colder states in the coming months. It's all very well and good. I live here in Chicago at the minute. We can go out to most places. They've got lovely patios and everything's arranged really nicely for you. I can't see us doing that in the middle of December. So there is going to have to be some real creative thinking outside of the box. And we're already seeing lots of this going on, which I'm going to talk to you about in a few slides' time. And when they do visit the on-premise, those people who have said that they absolutely will not go currently, we ask them, well, what will be the thing to get them back into the trade? What will it be? And, you know, it's no surprises. Some people just don't feel comfortable, and it's up to them. And what we're seeing here is that it's all about vaccines, and it's all about COVID-19 being completely gone. So we'll have to, time will tell. 38% waiting for the vaccine to come, 29% waiting for COVID-19 completely to go. But then there's a few sort of lesser things around consistent cases falling. So I mentioned before around what some different areas are doing to sort of combat these colder months which are coming, which is certainly going to be another challenge for the on-premise. Talking about Chicago in particular, we actually had some great news today that the mayor here has announced that it's going to be open up to bar indoor spaces again from October the 1st, and that indoor dining can increase from 25% to 45%. So that's certainly going to help in those winter months. But obviously, it's such a cold place that we're going to have to get creative around what we do around patios. And this is the same for all of the northern and sort of eastern states as well, places like Boston, New York, and obviously further afield up towards Minnesota and so on. They've actually ran a competition, the city of Chicago, to see creative ideas, and there's some really cool things using CTA, subway trains as dining carts, using old school buses as temporary dining areas, they're sort of heating pods in different places. So I think what we're going to get is a true unique on-premise experience this winter, which COVID-19 is really making the creatives get out in force. So let's talk about that experience. So we know that when people go out, they happen to have repeat visits, and there's about 1 in 2 who go. But when they go, are they enjoying themselves? And the answer is, well, we're going to come on to what the answer is, but what we can see here is the places that they go as well first. So which channels are on-premise visitors going to? So what we've got here is what's improving, what's increasing. So you can see that originally casual dining chains was the top one, 41% in the previous month, but we've seen independent restaurants take over that. And from some of the research we've seen, there's a real desire from consumers to stay local, to stay independent. And I think that's got a lot to do with people knowing that a lot of these restaurants and bars have had a real tough time of it, and they want to keep them going. So there is a sheer amount of loyalty which is going into that. And the other one I really want to jump out on is sports bars. Obviously, we went a whole period of time with no sport whatsoever, from sort of late March through till sort of mid-June, early July. But now we do have a unique time where pretty much all American sports and lots of European sports, etc., are back in. I was out just yesterday watching the Sunday football, and lots of patios doing a great trade. And I think what we'll see in the next time we do this survey, we will see that increase in sports bars even further. So to my point earlier, how are people getting on when they actually go? Are they enjoying it? And the great news is retailers have done such a fantastic job to pivot and to make this a really enjoyable time for people when they go out. People have been locked away for so long that when they do go out, they want to still have that great experience they can't recreate at home. So we can see that 84% are satisfied or very satisfied with their health and safety precautions, 79% satisfied with the atmosphere, and 83% satisfied with the overall experience. So when consumers do go out, they're very much enjoying the occasion. And those occasions are largely tied to food at the moment. And again, this is understandable pretty much because of the restrictions which have been in place in most places. So 42% of people would go out, they have drinks with their food, 27% go out for a relaxed, quiet drink. So it very much is about those low tempo occasions in the on-premise at the moment, as opposed to sort of big celebrations and big night outs. One thing which is really interesting is what type of brands and what type of categories people are drinking or eating when they're out in trade. And there's a strong, there's two thoughts here. There's two lines of thoughts. The first one is obviously it's been a really hard financial time for many people, and to go out and spend on luxuries such as premium spirits and so on could be really challenging. But then there are a completely other group who have been locked away but still been working and have actually saved quite a significant amount of money during this time because they've not been going out as much. Now that they are, what we're seeing is that people do want that treat spend. So it's almost they're going out less, but when they do go out, they're willing to spend a lot more to really make the most of that. And what we can see from this chart is that premium drinks, 52% of people who have ordered a premium drink in the last 2 weeks are doing so more than what they did pre-COVID-19. So there's certainly a big opportunity for premium spirit brands. And we know that a lot of retailers who we speak to, they're looking at cutting down their assortment and making it smaller. So there's a real sort of strong sales story and strong desire for the premium spirits brands here to make sure that they're part of the question and part of the answer for consumers. Let's take a little look at technology. I've always thought that the on-premise is one of the areas which is a little bit behind on technology, especially compared to some QSR and fast food places. This has really been a great time for them to get the game together and really bring in some new stuff. So let's see what consumers think of that. Essentially, 1 in 3 think it's very important. And for under 35, it's almost 1 in 2, 48% really wanting technology on their visits. What this can look like comes in various forms, but one thing which really has become almost the norm now is that contactless cashless payment. So we see a quarter of consumers wanting that. There's lots of pre-order and online payments going on, and then food and drink menus on phones. QR codes, I feel like COVID-19 is almost saved the QR code. You barely saw one before. Now they're absolutely everywhere. And some of the more advanced outlets and retailers are actually doing it so you can actually pay on your phone as well. So instead of just seeing the menu on there, you can fill in your bank details, everything's done. Basically, you never even need to see the server. I was out in the timeout market in Chicago. All you had to do was go and pick your drinks up from the bar yourself. Everything else was laid out for you. Okay, so where are people going for their drinking and eating occasions? Because it's been a significant change in where people socialize. And we've already touched on before around local support. This sort of enhances that even further. People wanting to go out more to local areas, support local businesses, as opposed to those big popular chains. So where are people actually going? Because it's changed significantly in the last 3 to 4 months. And I think what's largely down to is working from home. What we've seen is those central business district areas where people may have been in the offices, people going out on their lunch break, meeting their colleagues after work for drinks. Not the same occasion. And what we can see from this slide is 34% are actively avoiding trying to do that, and 23% are less likely to go out for lunch. What's that done is it's really pushed the visitation from those central business district areas into the suburbs and into the neighborhoods where we're seeing much more visitation and much more traction. So takeout really has been a saving grace for many retailers and many on-premise accounts throughout all of this, and it's managed to paper over the cracks in large areas and keep places going, and have done this in various ways. What we've seen is there's been a whole advent of ghost kitchens set up, but also places which would never have dreamed of doing a takeout menu previously. The Alinea Group here in Chicago did, multiple Michelin star restaurant, now offering a takeout option, would never have happened this time last year. And consumers have really responded to this. What we see is 65% have ordered takeout delivery of food in the last 2 weeks. That's constantly increasing throughout our surveys. But the one thing for beverage suppliers and distributors, where it does remain a challenge, is making sure that alcohol is part of that equation, because only 11% have ordered alcohol through takeout and delivery in the last 2 weeks. And it is a challenge, particularly when it comes around the price point, because, what's to stop a consumer just going to their local grocery store or their local liquor store to go and purchase alcohol instead of getting it from the delivery? So what can be done? Is it around unique offerings, on-premise exclusives? Is there something which can be done with wine and spirits in terms of serve style to really get creative to bring this to the fore? We know that takeout is increasing and it is here to stay. What we have looked at is some of the questions that we ask is around when COVID-19 is over and we do get back to some sort of normality, will you order takeout without alcohol or with alcohol? And what we can see is currently only 25% do. That was in total. So previously we showed 12%. That was just for the last 2 weeks. 25% is for the whole time this has been going on. This will actually increase to 46%, hopefully. And that's what we're getting from our numbers once that ends. So there is definitely room for growth for the category. So I just want to quickly summarize, and I've got about 10 quick points that I want to go through here. And I'll just take each one of these in turn before I finish up. So firstly, visitation is stabilizing. We have seen over the last 2 or 3 months pretty steady that we're around 1 in 2 consumers who are willing to come back into the on-trade. This is likely to stay the same until restrictions considerably change or a vaccine is delivered. Increasing demand. So consumers want completely different things now. Hygiene remains absolutely paramount. Over the last 6 months, the top factors all been around enhanced hygiene practices, distancing in venues, staff with PPE. But what's becoming more and more important is that outdoor seating area and making sure that people still feel like they're getting great value for money. And that's what's really important for the on-premise atmosphere. Financial and health concerns. So we absolutely know 63% say they're concerned with the impact on their personal finances. 80% say they're concerned with their health and wellness. So we still need to make sure that those 2 things are absolutely looked at, absolutely catered, and retailers continue to make sure that the right restrictions are in place. Because when they do, moving on to satisfaction, consumers are still loving going out into the on-premise. 84% saying that they're more than satisfied with their visits. Familiarity is really important. So what we're seeing here is those high tempo occasions just aren't really there at the moment. It's all about drinks and food, relaxed, quiet drinks, special occasions, much further down the pile. But what we may see with more sporting occasions coming back is sports bars having more and more visitation. I mentioned previously around financial polarization. We have a lot of the country on the real financial hardship currently, but we do have a lot of the country where premium drinks are now more of a thing for them because they have saved cash and they do want to go out and have that treat spend when out. More deliveries. We went through deliveries. There's obviously various different third-party apps which can bring this to life. It's making sure that alcohol remains a part of that for alcohol suppliers and distributors. And then we've got technology, which now 1 in 2 people really do, for the under 35s anyway, really do expect from their on-premise visits. Experience is key. Things like cocktails, supplying something that you can't get when you're at home. That's how the on-premise can still continue to win. And then lastly, local habits. That shift away from city centre venues into local ones, neighbourhoods and suburbs. Really important to see what's going on in those accounts and to ensure that they catered for just as much as the usual city centre places. And that is what I have for you. So that's been a very quick sort of wrap up into the on-premise and what's happening right now here in the US. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, thank you both so much for your input on this really fascinating stuff. So my first question is, I'm kind of throw a hardball. So, at a time when states are at all different levels of, lockdown, why is it important, do you think, to keep track of the big picture?
Go on, Mike. I'll let you take it first.
Because we're not going to be in lockdown forever. I was actually just reading something today that said, it's from, I don't remember the source, but essentially what experts are saying is with a vaccine in early 2021 and with a decrease in the number of cases through the middle of that year, that by, fall of 2021, things will really start to come back to pre-COVID times. So, yeah, it's a year plus to ride out, but in the greater scheme of things, that's not a big blip on the radar.
Yeah, and to add to that, I'd say, Emily, I think your question, I mean, that's exactly why we should still be looking at big data, because everything is so. In fact, it's probably more important now than ever to be able to see what is going on at different markets, at different breaks, and that obviously all adds up to a total country view. And so to echo Mike, yeah, I mean, it's not going to go on forever. And I think that the best placed companies are going to be the ones who have prepared for it and really understand, I think, particularly consumer research, particularly to know what people want when they visit either the off-premise or the on-premise, and how that is so different now to how it was previously.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of leads well into my next question that I was curious about. They say that the general economic recovery has been a bit of a K shape, right? Where, white collar workers have fared better than blue collar workers. Are we seeing something similar? Is that reflected in any of the spirits trends, or even is it reflective of in the type of companies that are doing well during this pandemic?
I mean, personally, I think what we're seeing, and obviously I said a bit in my slides about premium spirits doing well at the moment, but naturally what you get, and we saw this after the 2008 recession as well, which we were mainly covering just the UK then, but it's very similar to what happened on a global scale, is polarization. So you actually see value brands doing very well, and you see the high-end premium brands doing very well, and it's actually those middle, often standard brands, if you want to call them that, which get hit in the middle because they're getting hit from both sides. And I think we may end up seeing that again.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because we're seeing that, I think, with the liquor stores as well. You're seeing a lot of the value brands being purchased in other channels. And so that leaves, the liquor stores as the place to come for premium. So we're seeing premium spirits or premium wines. Those are the things that you don't have options to go to other channels for. But a lot of those value brands, you're seeing people cut down the number of trips, et cetera, et cetera. You're seeing people that are, the division in economic conditions then affect where people shop. So I think you absolutely are seeing a correlation there.
Huh, okay. What about, can either of you speak to supply chain challenges or inventory out of stocks?
I can tell you that with a lot of our retailers, what caught them by surprise early was an immediate, very, very fast shift in behavior from consumers to go to the bigger name brands, the ones that are very easy to recall. And the stores weren't set up for that. Like, they had spent months and months getting shelves stocked with the right, small brands, craft brands, artisanal thing, all of that. And all of a sudden that market dried up, and that hit them hard. They've got a lot of product to move. I think the other shift that occurred, a lot of the online sites are set up in a way that encourages shoppers to buy whatever's at the top of the list, and so you see a predominance of products that start with numbers, or A, B, or C, being purchased way more frequently than further down the alphabet. So it shocked the system in terms of inventory demand curves.
I think that from an on-premise perspective, not so much from the supply chain, but just in terms of how much products they will now have available. I mean, assortments here have always been very large compared to other countries in terms of on-premise, in terms of the selection which is available, both across beer and spirits, and in some sort of higher end food places, wine. What we're seeing now, and we're getting a lot of feedback from our retail clients, particularly some of the big national account chains, is that they're cutting back on assortment. So if they had 10 craft beers on before, they're going to have 7 now, just because they can't warrant to have that many on tap, ready to go. They might move more to a package model, but certainly assortment's getting smaller. And that means, again, to your point, Emily, around sort of big data and things like that, I think often the best placed suppliers are the ones who can prove that their products are the ones which will be most profitable for the retailers.
Yeah. Do both of you work with brands, or is it primarily retailers?
We're more suppliers than retailers, really. I mean, we work with suppliers, distributors, and retailers, but the vast majority of our business is providing consultancy for bev-al suppliers.
Okay. We're more balanced. Our business model is actually bringing brands and retailers together, so that brands can run campaigns, take their national content, take their national marketing and turn it into localized campaigns that then, enable and drive consumers to the retailers. So we work with both.
Okay.
Both.
So the reason for that question was, it's I hate to say it looks a little dire for craft brands right now. There's not a lot of good news for craft brands right now. What are your top advice for them to what they should be doing?
Well, I mean, our advice to them, and it's obviously self-serving because it's what we do, but we encourage them to not get stuck in the kind of catalog sites, right? They have to actively control their marketing and get their brand out on their own. Because if they're just depending on either online marketplaces or the online sites of stores to get them noticed, they just don't have the pull through there, right? They may get selected if somehow someone knows about it, but they really have to drive that recognition at the top of the funnel for themselves.
Yeah,
it's tricky. Yeah, it's really difficult. I think the craft in particular, it's getting hit now by obviously imports been in growth from a beer perspective for quite a good number of years, and now within that category, out of nowhere, we've got last 3 years, who would have thought we'd have hard seltzers there? So it's more fight for space. And it's more fight for space in getting there. But I think what can work for them is this shift towards more local. And that's, one of the absolute buzzwords for any craft beer company is always going to be local. And I think there's got to be an element of protect your core at the moment, batten down the hatchets, protect what's local to you before any sort of state expansion. And with people staying near in the neighborhoods, etc., I think there could be a consumer pull for that type of product.
Yeah, I talked to a craft brand, a friend of mine, who they actually pulled back all their other state selling and just stuck with the state they're distilled in because they could deliver there, and it didn't make sense. The economics didn't work during this period to do anything else.
Absolutely.
Sure. I wonder if, and this is just kind of an anecdotal question or a theoretical question, if you will, but I wonder if selections are going down on premise, which is by and large where a lot of craft is sold, in addition to the distillery. But I wonder if we'll see more focus in the off premise if the on premise isn't as viable of a route for craft distillers.
I think you're seeing it with the better equipped retailers, the ones who are maybe more progressive or who kind of got out ahead of the curve when it came to using digital. That several of the chains went to running virtual tastings, and so they were very actively curating a craft mindset for their consumers. And there are many retailers who have chosen to focus their product selection around wines or spirits or even craft beers, and they're in a better position to nurture that. I think the mainstream general product mix kind of retailer is always going to struggle with that because they don't have an anchor for their customer set. And that's why my point I made was know the customers you want to bring in, because that's how you can encourage them to go toward craft or go toward the local brands.
Yeah. So Mike, specifically in the off-premise, is anyone easing back into on-site tastings? Are there states that are still allowing that, or is it a no-go?
I can't speak to the regulation side, but some of the retailers I've talked to, because the stores are small, it's just not worth it to them to try to open up tastings. I did hear about a couple where they set up tastings to Matt's earlier point about outdoor seating. Some of the local retailers during the summertime, at least, were taking advantage of getting special permits so they could have a tasting on the sidewalk in front, right? Or setting up something, a tent, just doing something that gets people to be able to try it, but doesn't bring them in the store. It's just not, everyone feels too closed in these liquor stores.
Okay. Then I have a couple of quick questions on, specific trends within the spirit space. You talked about this, Mike, but I wanted to get back into it because, low and no alc was the subject of conversation. It was getting bigger and bigger as a subject of conversation. But then COVID hit and it sort of disappeared.
Mhm.
So I wonder, your presentation made it seem like it's still going strong.
It's still relevant. I wouldn't say it's knocking down records or anything like that right now, but it's still solid. I think a lot of that had to do with the summertime because one of the things you did see is more people outside, and
Yeah.
so those are the kind of alcohol products that play well to people taking that product out with them wherever whatever they're doing. Um, and so I think that's what kept it relevant. I wouldn't say that it's top of mind for consumers right now when they go shop looking for low and no and health, but it's certainly a factor.
Yeah. Matt, do you guys track that on premise or?
We do. It's still relatively small for on premise, but we've seen it's much bigger in Europe, to be honest, in
Mhm.
terms of sort of high end premium soft drinks and having that sort of offering available. It's basically like quality mixers and stuff like that. It's like the gin movement in the UK and wider Europe is massive. I mean, gin was a big category anyway, but in the last 5 years, it's just exploded, and that's largely because of a whole selection of craft gin brands, but also because the mixers have raised the game as well. And, a lot of people who would think, oh, I don't like gin and tonic. It wasn't actually the gin they didn't like, it was the tonic they didn't like. And now they're having higher quality tonics and that's sort of coming to life. So I do think in those higher end cocktail bars, there's definitely a need for it. But from the low, no alcohol sort of point of view, it's there. But you do see quite just sort of token offerings at time, really, on many menus. And as things are getting cut down, I think it's going to be more sort of specialist places where we see in the short term. But then it wouldn't surprise me if it does come back pretty big within sort of 6 months' time.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the RTD trend, right? It's pretty much it was doing well before COVID and now it's really exploded. But something that I often wonder is I remember when I first started in this business around, 2010, we had a boom of RTDs in pouches, right? They sort of came and everyone was like, "Oh, these are gonna, these are gonna last forever." It's different this time. um, you know, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is this sort of RTD boom different than the previous, or is this just something we're destined to cycle every few years?
I think it's got a better chance this time round than before because of people not being able to or not feeling comfortable enough to go out and have cocktails on premise so you can get one in a can. So just the circumstances fit it better.
Hmm.
The products are going to have to be strong. There's still a lot of sort of different brands out there. There's some very, very good ones. There's some ones not as good. And I think that the product offering is going to have to be really, really strong for someone to sort of stick to it. I think hard seltzers have helped this as well, just because people have now got used to drinking from that style format. That format of the sort of thin can is relatively new. And I think consumers now aren't opposed to that and actually quite like it. So I think there's a few sort of external factors which are helping give it more of a chance this time round.
Yeah, I think that you just hit on a big point because consumer behavior is a hard thing to shift, right? And if people are used to trying things and then moving on to the next interesting thing, it's hard to change that kind of behavior. But there've been a progression of things recently, and even throw boxed wine into this, right? People are now shifting their mindset about packaging that makes their lives easier and still conveys the quality of the product, right? So the hard part is then, to Matt's point, discerning the good from the not so good in the choices. But as a category, as a packaging form, I think it'll continue.
Okay. Is there a place for it on premise, Matt? I mean, obviously, craft beer in cans does fine on premise, but cocktails?
Depends on the place, I think. I think if you have sort of smaller venues with high turnover of customers, potentially, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because if you go to a cocktail bar, part of it's all about the experience, isn't it? And you want that theatre of the bartender making
Mhm.
the drink, and that sort of takes it away. But do you know where I think it could do really well?
Yeah.
Stadiums and more sort of concessionary venues. I think there's a real sort of open goal there. And even places, I mean, I used to do presentations last year and it was all about, oh, there's axe throwing bars, there's,
Yeah.
curling bars. And obviously that isn't the case now. But I feel in those more like experiential venues, there's a time and a place for those for RTDs. So yeah, perhaps not at the high end, perhaps not mainstream, but certainly in the different types of on-premise venues, I could see it working.
Well, that makes sense. All right, gentlemen, did we miss anything that you think is really important or really interesting that's happening right now?
I think it's just, no one's got a crystal ball, have they? It's one of those, like, who knows what's around the corner. But just, I think innovation's high and creativity's high to make sure that people have pivoted so well and sort of hustled their way through this year. It's going to be really interesting to see what 2021 brings.
I think that's a good way to end it, because you summed it up well.
All right. Well, hopefully someday we'll be doing this again in person. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming in and giving your presentations. They were fantastic. I think people are going to find them very useful. So
Awesome.
take it easy, and we'll catch up with you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Guys.
Bye, both.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you want to see more from us, you can watch our other videos that are airing during Global Bar Week, or you can check out our entire collection at parkstreetuniversity.com.